Part 2. Lower Fire Month, 9th month, 4th day 07-14. The members of Blue Rose had entered the keep early in the morning. Each of them carried a large sack, which made metallic clattering noises when put on the ground. The sacks contained all their gear, because entering the royal palace all girded for war was not very appropriate. After putting down their weighty luggage, the group rotated their shoulders. Renner looked kindly upon them, and their team leader, Lakush Alvain Dale Indra, asked her, "Will you have any princessly duties to discharge later?" Renner had hardly any power, but she still had her responsibilities as the princess. "It's fine. Those matters can wait. Don't worry." Aha! A mischievous expression came over Lakush's face. Similarly, Renner also flashed her a mischievous look, which then melted into unrestrained laughter. "Lakush, once you're ready, I'd like to ask you to take care of that matter as soon as possible." "Why? I heard yesterday that we were going to attack in secret, taking each location in turn. Isn't that so?" asked Evil Eye, the masked arcane magic caster. She had not removed her face-concealing mask even in the royal palace. She had not been censured for such suspicious dress because she was an adamantite-ranked adventurer, the elite of humanity, and also because her team leader Lakush was a member of the peerage. "Something unexpected happened last night, so I feel we need to change part of the plan. It's like this." Renner described the brothel raid from last night. Climb stood stock-still behind Renner, and the members of Blue Rose looked upon him with respectful eyes. Their gazes made him feel itchy. Charging into the brothel and saving people from their hellish confines was not Climb's doing. He had merely borrowed the strength of the two men who had gone in with him. Frankly speaking, Climb had done nothing worthy of praise. Instead, he felt disappointed with himself. He had not been rebuked for his reckless, independent action, and the plan had not been cancelled, only altered. The fact that he actually felt relieved by that only made it that much more tragic. "Not bad, Cherry Boy." "Yup, Garen's right. Apprehending a member of Six Arms is a pretty big deal. Undying King, Davernic. Void Cutter, Pazillion. Bloody Scimitar, Edstrom. 1,000 Kills, Mombist. Illusion Devil, Succulent. And then their leader, Battle Demon, Zero." Tia smoothly recited each name. "Davernic is undead. Pazillion is said to be able to cut down even distant foes. Edstrom can skillfully use special magic weapons. Mombist is a fencer with a poison blade, adept at lunges. Succulent has already been apprehended. And Zero is a brawler who excels in empty-handed combat. Each of them is equivalent to an adamantite-ranked adventurer. Catching one of them is a big A-dus. Amazing work, Climb. Still, it was great good fortune that you met Brain Angleus and fought by his side." Climb agreed with that sentiment. The fact that he could take out Succulent in one hit proves that Angleus, the man who fought the kingdom's strongest warrior, Gaze of Stronov, to a standstill, is the real deal. That said, I'm more interested in that old butler which even he couldn't beat. "I didn't get Sebasama's address." Climb. "Did he not tell you because he was wary of you, or did you not ask because you knew you should not have asked?" "Which is it?" "Both of them, Evil Eye Sama. Perhaps he might have told me if I had asked him. However, Sebasama volunteered his help despite the fact that I was the one who involved him in this, and I did not want to learn anything which might cause him difficulty." "You're an honest chap." "Yup." The sisters seemed to be sizing Climb up from head to toe. "I have no idea why I've never heard of such an amazing person before." Climb could sense everyone's sudden wariness of Sebes, as though it had been triggered by those words from Evil Eye. Just as he was about to retort, Lakush clapped a few times and the mood in the air changed. "Alright, let's leave this aside for a moment. If not for him, we would not have found the accurate location of the brothel, and we would not have captured the head of the slave trafficking division, Coco Doll. Both Climb and we are indebted to him." "You're right, Lakush. Then, Princess, You said you were going to change part of the plan. Does that mean we'll be attacking a new location instead? Yes, Evil Eye-san. I was hoping to attack several points at once by today and take them all down in one fell swoop. They will gain the advantage, and we will lose it the more time we take. The room was dead silent. Only Blue Rose would be participating in this operation. They had insisted on taking the targets one after the other due to this lack of manpower. But Princess, I believe we told you before that we don't have the people for it, right? Did someone agree to help us in the middle of the night? We can't hire adventurers for this, can we? One of the founding principles of the Adventurers Guild was to defend humanity against external threats. Thus there was an unwritten rule in the guild that they would never involve themselves in disputes between humans. Otherwise the adventurers' guilds of various countries would not be able to step over national borders and help each other. Therefore, if the guild judged that their involvement in a matter would result in their involvement with a perpetual feud, they would apply pressure on their adventurers to abide by that unwritten rule. This applied even if the guild's intervention would save lives. The pressure which the guild could apply included warnings, not recommending jobs to them, and expulsion from the guild in the worst-case scenario. As a result, there were some adventurers who engaged in illegal activities, becoming part of a group known as workers. However, there were rumors that the guild would employ their own private assassins to go after those who violated the rules with malice aforethought. The fact that Blue Rose had begun their opposition to Eight Fingers was a violation of this unwritten rule. But they were adamantite-ranked adventurers and arguably the guild's representatives, so there was no way they would actually be chased out of the guild. Thus their actions had received tacit approval. However, the only reason why they had been excused this trespass was because they were the ones who had done it. The most stupid thing we could do is to involve the city guard in order to bulk up our numbers. Those people have the guards in their pocket. All we can do is have them handle cleanup at the end. Otherwise there'll be trouble. Same with borrowing house troops from the nobles. We can't ask them for help when we don't know who's in bed with Eight Fingers. HMPH. The only people we can trust are Stronov and the men loyal to him, his warriors. No, we don't even know how many of his warriors can be trusted. Practically speaking, yes. In the end, there's not much we can do because we don't exactly know how far our opponents can reach. Still, if we do nothing but investigate because of that, the kingdom will fall apart one day. We can't adequately remedy the problem when we've got cries for help from all sides. Renner nodded as she heard Lequeux's complaints. The Empire's interference only compounded the turmoil within the kingdom as corruption continued to eat into the government. Climb narrowed his eyes, as though he had glimpsed the sun from behind her back. After all, his mistress insisted on fighting on despite the dire circumstances. Once more, Climb realized that she was the only one capable of ruling the kingdom and granting happiness to the masses, and his loyalty to her was further strengthened. However, there were those who did not understand that point and had decided that all the princess had to be was a decoration, her sole purpose being to sit there and look beautiful. Climb was filled with anger at these people, primarily the nobles, and his hands balled up into fists. However, Renner's lovely voice filtered into his ears and dispersed his anger, and he once more committed himself to listening to their conversation. You're right. Therefore, I thought of asking a reliable noble for help. You know of trustworthy nobles, Princess? I do, Evil Eye-san. There aren't many of them, but I know of one who can be relied upon. Oh, and who is that, Renner? I don't doubt your judgment, but there's no point in them being reliable if they can't do anything for us. There is also no guarantee that he'll be able to muster up enough troops from his domain either. I don't think that will be a problem. Also, I will be bringing the warrior captain along. I can understand that. The warrior captain's a reliable man. Or rather, if even he's in bed with Eight Fingers, then we're finished. Climb, please go call Marquis Raven over. He was present at the latest meeting, so he ought to still be within the royal capital. The Marquis. I did see him in the company of the prince. Indeed, Marquis Raven matched all their criteria for the man they need. His trustworthiness aside, he was one of the 6 great nobles, those whose assets and so on surpassed those of other nobles by far. However, there was no proof that Raven was not in cahoots with 8 Fingers. One could also say that his wealth might have been the result of 8 Fingers' bribes. However, Clyme promptly rejected that notion. Renner, his mistress, the wisest of all women and the one who was the most deserving of respect, had chosen that name. That being the case, Marquis Raven ought to be reliable. However, the members of Blue Rose seemed displeased, in contrast to Clyme. Oi, princess. Are you sure you can trust this Marquis guy? They say Raven's a bat who flits back and forth between the royal and noble factions. If he's doing it all for his own gain, then 8 Fingers' filthy lucre will move his heart. I don't want him to leak intelligence about us, princess. As the disapproval poured on from the gathered people, a loud clap cut through the air. Its source was Lacuche. That's enough, all of you. Ah, Renner, Marquis Raven didn't exactly leave a good impression on me. Is he really trustworthy? I can't guarantee that, and I believe he's taken money from 8 Fingers. Everyone present was surprised, and they had confused looks on their faces. However, someone hit on a possibility and asked, "Are you trying to spread false information in order to manipulate the enemy?" We did that before some assassinations. Spread news about assassins coming from somewhere to divert the attention of the security personnel. Renner shook her head at the notion of the assassination. That's not it, Tina-san and Tia-san. I believe that some people won't help 8 Fingers even if they do take their money, right? You could say I lost my bet if it turns out he was more active behind my back than I thought, but... Clyme, go get Marquis Raven. He should be willing to meet me once you tell him about the destruction of the brothel and the capture of the head slaver. Clyme's eyes shifted, checking the light outside the window. The morning sun was almost blinding, and it seemed a little early to wake someone up. However, one could not keep great nobles at one's beck and call, so it might be best to arrange a meeting now. Should we talk about capturing the head of the slave trade? Your servant believes that it might be better to keep it a secret for the time being. Renner said that she had to play that trump card to compel an audience, but surely not even a great noble could refuse a princess's summons. That being the case, should they not keep it in reserve? Renner shook her head at Clyme's opinion. We need to lay our cards before him if we want him on our side. Doing so is the best proof that we trust the Marquis. No wonder. Clyme nodded and then bowed respectfully. Your servant understands. Then, I shall summon Marquis Raven now. Please do, Clyme. Now, since this will take some time, shall we have tea? Lower Fire Month, 9th month, 4th day 09:37. Blue Rose believed that it would take some time for Marquis Raven to arrive. They estimated that he would come by around noon. As a nobleman, he had a fixed schedule to keep, which largely consisted of meeting with other nobles. It would be one thing if the king summoned him for an audience, but Renner was just a powerless princess, after all. She would be lower on Raven's list of priorities. Therefore, when Clyme returned earlier than expected, they all thought for a moment that he had been chased back. Thus they were hard-pressed to hide the looks of surprise on their face when they saw the forms of 2 men behind him. One of them was, of course, Marquis Raven. His appearance was, in a word, impeccable. His tight-fitting clothes were made of some sort of rare animal hide, possibly some sort of magical beast, and stitched with goldwork. The embroidery around his collar and his front buttons was of exquisite workmanship. And the front buttons probably had tiny gemstones worked into them, given the way they caught and reflected the light. His stand-up collar completely concealed his narrow neck. This was top-class apparel, which was undeniably suited to him. He was the very picture of a member of the kingdom's 6 great nobles. After him was a slightly plump man. When Renner saw him, she exclaimed in surprise, "Oni-sama, yo, if it isn't my sister from a different mother. You look well. Oh, and if it isn't the Alvenaris and the renowned Blue Rose. How wonderful. To think we'd run into so many adamantite-ranked adventurers here." The man who had entered without knocking, and who had addressed them all in a bright and cheerful voice, was none other than the second Prince Zanak Valery Nagana Ryle Vyself. Lakush curtsied to him, and Zanak replied by way of a grand wave of his hand. "I heard you were talking about something quite interesting, so I decided to drop in. I have come in response to Renner Denka's summons." "Yes. Thank you for coming all his way, Marquis Raven. Please raise your head." Renner rose from her own seat as she saw her elder brother, one with higher status than herself, make his entrance. Marquis Raven had a cold smile on his face as he straightened up. His smile was very sinister, and it made people think he was quite creepy. Yet, for some reason, it seemed perfectly suited to him. It did not displease others who looked upon him. Then, would the others mind retiring to the adjacent room for a while? "I understand, Oni-sama." Lakush climbed. "I'm sorry, but could you please go next door?" "Got it." With that clipped reply, Lakush indicated that her colleagues should get their things. They were probably going to gear up in the next room to avoid wasting time. The 5 members of Blue Rose and Climb nodded in unison before entering the adjacent room. After she watched them leave, Renner bade the 2 remaining people to take a seat. "Please, have a seat over here." "Yes, Renner Denka." "Sure, sis." One of them threw themselves onto the seat, while the other one settled himself in gracefully. Renner poured a cup of tea and placed it before Raven. "I am honored that your highness would personally pour a cup of tea for me. It might have chilled a little. Please forgive me." "Oh yeah, where's mine?" Zanak glared unhappily at the 2 tea drinkers. "Ah, but do you not dislike tea, Oni-sama?" "True, I'm not a fan of colored water. Still, it feels like something's missing if I don't have anything to wet my throat. Then I shall have the maid fetch something." "Will fruit juice do?" "Tea will be fine. There's no need to let news leak out. I doubt the maids will have time to report to their families if we make our move by today. Still, you should be careful. Women have big mouths, after all. In particular, the maids who serve in the royal palace are frighteningly quick at tattling." Renner smiled, then poured a cup of tea and placed it before Zanak. "HMPH. So you've already made use of the Maid Intelligence Network, have you?" "What do you mean?" "Ah, never mind." With that, Zanak took a swig of tea. "Ack, it's bitter," he said while sticking out his tongue. "Still, your highness, what matter is there which needs to be discussed so early? That said, your servant will rush to your side at any time. You have but to give the word." "Thank you. Then, I shall get to the point since time is tight. I wish to borrow your intellect." After coughing briefly, she wasted no time getting to the meat of the subject. Marquis Raven's narrow eyes parted slightly, full of surprise. However, he recovered almost instantly and hid his consternation. "My intellect, since it is your highness that asks. Your servant fears he will not be able to live up to your expectations. I think you will do fine. After all, I doubt anyone is your equal in affairs of the court, Marquis Raven." Marquis Raven and the prince exchanged looks. Princess Renner had hardly ever participated in political power struggles. So what did she mean by affairs of the court? Marquis Raven smiled leisurely. He knew too little, and thinking too hard on the matter would only lead to a strange conclusion. That much was obvious. He decided to hold off on his decision until he learned more. "And what would you have your servant tell you?" "I wish to ask if someone like yourself, as a secret supporter of the royal faction, or rather, as the one who holds the entire royal faction together, could mobilize the faction's forces." "What?" Given the look on Marquis Raven's face, one might be forgiven for thinking a spell had suddenly gone off in front of his face. Just about anyone who saw this would have been shocked because Marquis Raven was not normally an expressive man. Still, his reaction was understandable. Any other noble might laugh it off, but this was a truth which had been hidden until now. People thought of Marquis Raven as a bat, flitting from one side to another, but the truth was that he had been guiding the royal faction and warding off any potential conflicts which might tear the country in two. His private crusade was the biggest part in keeping the country whole. The kingdom would have fallen apart long ago without someone like Raven around. Zenak sucked in a tiny breath. He had already sensed that Renner, with her unimaginable intellect, was a fiend in human form. Yet, she was like a prisoner in the royal palace, without eyes or hands to see or work her will. How had she grasped the truth under these circumstances? Nobody else in the kingdom knew the answer besides Zenak. Both of them suspected that she was merely bluffing, but they rejected that notion almost immediately. Renner spoke as though explaining a fact of life. Both of them had seen people hiding daggers behind their smiles, but Renner's attitude did not seem like an act. In that case, how exactly had she found out about that? Renner seemed to think further explanation was in order. She ignored Marquis Raven's shocked expression and calmly continued. No, perhaps I should have asked one of the two members of the royal faction, but Marquis Blumrush has been secretly passing on information to the Empire. No. That would mean... What did you say? A moment please, Your Highness. Zenak murmured hoarsely, but Raven's eyes shot wide open and he shouted. Marquis Blumrush. You knew, right? After all, is that not why you tried to keep the good Marquis from learning too much? The two of them stared speechlessly at Renner. They looked at the beautiful girl, who calmly said, Am I wrong? You. Marquis Raven was so overcome that he forgot to address her as Your Highness. Renner had been right about everything. Only Zenak and Marquis Raven knew that Marquis Blumrush, a great noble of the royal faction, had betrayed the kingdom. They had kept quiet about his treason to keep the balance between the factions from breaking down. Marquis Raven had been desperately trying to keep this from the noble faction and had come up with all manner of schemes to keep the Empire from learning this. His efforts should have been flawless, until now. Zenak only knew about this because Marquis Raven had told him. Then how had this caged songbird discovered it? As Zenak imagined it, he felt himself break out in goosebumps. How did you find out? Oh, I just listened to what everyone was saying. And I do talk with the maids from time to time. How reliable were the maids' words? An unbelievable idea filled Marquis Raven's mind. And then, after sifting throughout his memories, he could conclude that what Renner said, what she had gleaned from the conversation and gossip traded by the maids, was on the mark. The girl before him had sifted through a mountain of dross and picked out the diamonds in the rough, which she had fashioned into a jeweled necklace. Therefore, a monster. He quietly intoned the word that most suited the woman known as Renner. Renner should have heard that loud and clear, but all she did was smile, without rebuking Marquis Raven for his rudeness. He abandoned the line of thought he had been following until just now. She deserved his honesty, and his recollections of the past were correct. Your servant understands. Then, I seek to bare my heart to you. Do you object, my prince? After seeing Zenak nod, Marquis Raven straightened up and looked Renner in the face. His attitude now looked quite similar to Gazef when he had his sword raised. However, before that, your servant wishes to address the real Renner Denka. Is that permissible? What do you mean? Renner asked innocently, as though she had no idea what was going on. A long time ago, your servant once saw a girl. With incredible insight, that girl spoke words of invaluable wisdom. However, your servant took a long time before he understood the meaning and value of those words. Marquis Raven's voice echoed through the silent room. She was a girl whose words taxed the understanding of others. When your servant saw this girl, who was viewed as incomprehensible by others, for a fleeting moment, your servant saw a dangerous individual. A dangerous individual? Renner asked calmly. Yes. Your servant had merely glimpsed a fraction of it and had thus written it off as a baseless worry. However, what your servant thought at the time was those are a pair of hollow eyes which do not care about the world and hold everything in contempt. Single quote. The mood in the room was vastly different from before, and a chill seemed to spread through the air. Marquis Raven hunched his shoulders as if to protect himself. However, when your servant saw that girl again, she had the aura of a child about her. At that time, your servant believed that he had been mistaken. Therefore, Your Highness, I was wondering if you could show me the cleverly concealed true nature of yours. Their eyes met. It looked as though a pair of serpents were writhing and struggling against each other. And then, Renner's eyes lost their shine. Marquis Raven smiled coldly, as though he had seen something nostalgic. Ah, as I thought, it was actually. Zanak broke out in a cold sweat as his little sister, who had a pure and lovely smile on her face, suddenly turned into a frightening monster. No, in truth, he had already sensed her disgusting true face beneath her beautiful looks. However, he had guessed that Renner wanted to seize power for herself, or to shatter the kingdom that held her prisoner. It would seem those guesses had been off the mark. This was a being that was fundamentally different from himself, something alien to him. As I expected, Renner Denka. Your Highness' eyes are just like the ones I recall from my memory. Were you merely pretending ever since then? No, Marquis Raven. I was not acting. I was satisfied. Does Your Highness perhaps refer to your soldier, the man Climb? Oh yes. All this is thanks to my Climb. Oh. To think that that boy could actually change Your Highness. Your servant thought of him as nothing but a child. What does he mean to Your Highness, if I might ask? You mean Climb? Renner's gaze trailed off, staring into the air. She was thinking about what words she could use to describe his value to her. Renner Theor Chardelin Ryle Vyself. If there was only one word to summarize her entire being, that would be golden. That word derived from her blinding beauty. However, very few people knew that she possessed a talent that far outstripped even her good looks. Her talents lay in thinking, insight, observation, innovation, understanding, and the like. All her mental faculties were abnormally well developed. In other words, she was a genius. Her talent could only be described as a gift from the heavens. Her deductions might seem to have come from flashes of inspiration, but the truth was that they were pieced together from countless scattered fragments of information, gathered by her extraordinary powers of observation. In all likelihood, nobody on the continent could match up against her mental abilities. If one were pressed to find an equal for her, then one would have to look beyond the human race. However, very few entities were on her level, even among these superhuman beings. In Nazarick, only Albedo, the guardian overseer who could manage the vassals of every single floor, as well as Demiurge, who possessed a fiendish intellect and was hyper-competent in every aspect of national administration, be it military, domestic and foreign affairs, could be considered on par with her. Human beings often considered matters from their own perspectives. From that point of view, one could say that strange or wondrous people were merely labels applied by plebeians. That said, she had a flaw. She could not understand why she could understand these things but others could not. Perhaps someone on her level might have been able to appreciate how gifted she truly was. If that were the case, the outcome would probably have been different. However, there was nobody like that around. In the end, when a little girl spoke of things that baffled those who heard them, the reaction to her was fear. Renner was very cute as a child, and so she was not hated. Instead, she was cherished to a certain extent. However, the fact that nobody could understand what she said had an extreme effect on her mental development. The girl's heart began to warp as time went by. Perhaps it might be easier to describe this phenomenon as The loneliness of genius. Trapped in an environment where there was nobody else like her, the stress she had to bear grew and grew. For a time, she could not keep anything down. She threw up whatever she ate. Those who saw the princess become skinnier and skinnier by the day felt that she would not be long for this world. If not for that puppy of hers, that prediction might well have come true. Even if she had somehow endured it, what returned might well have been a demon queen. She would have made decisions through cold, mathematical logic, making the few suffer for the sake of the many. At that time, it had only been a passing fancy. She had gone out with her guards on a rainy day to lift her spirits, and then the girl had encountered a dying puppy. The dying puppy looked at her, its master, with a strange expression in its eyes. What a weighty gaze, she had thought. The expression in its eyes was one of innocent reverence. She was used to others looking at her like an oddity, and she was used to people looking at her with adoration. However, she could not understand the look in the puppy's eyes. In those sincere eyes, she saw revulsion, surprise, delight, emotion, and a human being. Indeed, in those eyes, she saw a human being like herself. The puppy which the girl had picked up became a boy, and then a man. Whether he was a puppy, a boy, or a man, those eyes peered through her with the same blinding purity. However, it no longer bothered her. Thanks to those eyes, she could speak to others like a normal person. She could coexist with the vulgar, inferior life forms around her. And now, Renner's world was complete so long as Climb was in it. Climb. If I could join with them. And if I could chain Climb up and take care of them like a pet, and make sure he couldn't go anywhere, perhaps that might be better. The air in the room froze. Even Marquis Raven was shocked, to say nothing of Zenak, Renner's half-brother. They had thought the most beautiful woman in the kingdom would spout some childish fantasy. No, they should not have expected any such saccharine sweet simpering from the true Princess Renner, but they had not expected her to go that far. If only she had been bothered by her deviant passions. What she said flew in the face of all common sense. I see. So that is your true nature. How shall I say this? When you were young, I felt something was off, like I had misfastened a button. But now I fully understand your abnormality. Really, Oni-sama, I do not think I have done anything abnormal. Take care of him if you will. Nobody will object to your highness. No, it might still be difficult. Unless you had help. Indeed, it'll be quite hard to fulfill that dream while maintaining the facade of a proper princess. And there's no point in forcing him to look at me. I want to chain him down and take care of him like a dog, while he looks at me with those eyes of his. Few people enjoyed hearing about the sexual fetishes of others. Marquis Raven could not help but want to stagger a few steps back after making contact with the soul of the woman called Renner. Like a dog. Does that mean you do not love him, your highness? Renner turned an incredulous, scornful gaze on the Marquis. Of course I love him. I like the way he looks at me. And I love how he clings to me like a puppy. Forgive me, but I do not understand it. That is not called love, my sister. I think love can take many forms. 1,000 apologies, but I find this topic very hard to follow. I do not need you to understand me. All you need to know is that I like him, and that I love him. She's weird. They had sensed something twisted about her mind, but they had not expected her to be this warped. The two of them glanced at each other, before the eyes of the princess with the abnormal mind. Both of them were at a loss for what to do. They had heard that the princess had fallen in love with a common soldier, and had expected that it might blow up into a matter of national importance. Yet, what they had heard was far more ridiculous than they had expected. Well then, the problem of fetishes. It is not a fetish. It is simply love. Renner sounded like she was reproachfully interrupting Raven's words, and he resisted the urge to shoot back. Very well, love it is, then. Right. Although under the present circumstances, the union of your highness with Climb Kaka is a little... It's impossible. Not just that, if word got out, you'd be married off immediately to some noble. If it was Aniki, who's in deep with the noble faction, he'd probably pick one of the nobles from the noble faction. Indeed, Oni-sama, if our eldest brother took the throne, my marriage would be the first thing he would push through. I believe they've already discussed the matter beforehand. After all, there's a noble who looks at me like his personal possession every time we meet. Your servant is aware that a certain nobleman is willing to join the noble faction, but he requires an appropriate inducement. Still, when you think about it, it's not likely that I can be with Climb, no. Even if he received a title, he'd be a baron at best. And even if he somehow received a higher title, there's no way they'd let a princess marry someone beneath her station like him. I fully understand that. Given the current state of the kingdom, that dream of yours cannot come true no matter what methods you use. Zynak smiled thinly. He was certain that this was the best move he could make. How about making a deal with me? If I gain the throne, I will match you to Climb. I accept. That was fast. Are you sure? There is no reason for me to refuse. After all, that bet has the highest probability of success. When you came to my room with Marquis Raven, I had thought of asking you the same thing myself. That is to say, you had already worked this out ahead of time? Zynak smiled bitterly by way of reply, but his heart was in a different state from his face. While he had guessed that his little sister was smarter than him, he had not expected to have been so completely outclassed by her. When he thought calmly about it, there was no need for Renner to be so honest with him. No, it was understandable if she had done so in order to evoke this exact response from him. He cursed his sister in his heart. You monster. Also, Oni-sama. Or rather, this should be a matter for Marquis Raven. What does your highness command? Marquis, I believe you have a son, do you not? Indeed I do. My child is 5 this year. Is something the matter? The image of his darling son's face appeared in Raven's mind, and he fought the urge to squish his cheeks. He thought of the look of disgust on Zynak, who was sitting next to him, and forcefully swallowed the urge to sing his child's praises. Please wed your son to me. Absolutely not. How could I turn my child over to a woman like you? Raven exclaimed. Then, he met Zynak's icy gaze, and looked at Renner's still smiling face, and he blushed crimson at his gross misconduct. Please forgive me, your highnesses. Your servant was momentarily confused, and he coughed, and then turned to Renner. Your highness, forgive my intrusion, but could you tell your servant the reason for that? You should know well the reason for that, no? Oi, sis. You were the one who brought it up. You would marry your servant's son and bear Climb's child. Your servant's son would then bear a child with the woman he loved, and that child would carry on the family name. Your highness would then be his mother in name only. Am I correct? It is quite a good plan. Your highness would be able to bear a child with the man you love, and although it would be a deception, your servant would be able to continue his bloodline. I have no interest in domains or the succession. All I require is a stipend for my trueborn child. I will not make a claim upon your family estate. In this respect, your servant has the utmost faith in your highness. Even father will not be able to easily reject a proposal like this from a loyal vassal like Marquis Raven. The Marquisate will gain the royal bloodline, and you can be with the man you love. And I will have you as a collaborator. Nobody loses out, and any betrayal means we all go down together. It's quite a perfect plan. Still, you shouldn't be talking about this sort of thing in front of me. I merely wanted to be sure you were on my side, Oni-sama. Besides, I doubt you'd want to know after the fact, am I wrong? Zynak did not answer. This was because Renner was correct. In addition, he could not possibly refuse a proposal like this which had so thoroughly ensnared each other's weaknesses. She might have a screw loose, but someone as excellent as herself was an indispensable talent for the future of the kingdom. Now then, that is enough about ourselves. I hear your highness has clashed with Eight Fingers and captured the head of their slave trading enterprise. Indeed, it is as Climb has told you. Thus, I wish to press the attack before Eight Fingers retreats back into the shadows. I have learned about the activities of Eight Fingers within the royal capital, and I wish to attack these locations by today. The only problem is a lack of manpower. I called upon you, Marquis Raven, because I wished to borrow your strength. Zenak and Raven looked at each other, and Zenak was the first to speak. And which locations will you be attacking? Runner handed them the transcribed parchment, and the two of them went over it. And this information has been verified? Naturally. I had Lakush investigate it for me. I've just received reports that these are Eight Fingers installations. The problem is that all these locations are in the domains of different nobles. It was not a problem of extraterritoriality yet, but charging into a noble's domain was essentially challenging the noble in question. That should not be a problem. If we can find evidence connected to Eight Fingers, we can apply pressure on the nobles. Even if we don't find it, we just have to search harder. At least we'll know where they'll go to dispose of documents that are troublesome to themselves. The three of them laughed. There was no warmth in that laughter. Then, sister, I have a question. Or rather, an important suggestion. Zenak looked around. This was the first time he had checked to see that nobody else was present. In other words, this was a very important topic, of the utmost secrecy. Actually, our elder brother has been taking money from one of Eight Fingers' divisions. We were hoping to use this to oust him from the succession, so we were checking to see if that division had headquarters in the royal capital. Now, we have received confirmation that this division does have a base here. I was thinking of adding it to the list of targets. Certainly. We might as well take them all out in one fell swoop. After all, who knows when we'll have another chance like this if we miss this one. And which division is this? The drugs division. That's quite unfortunate. Several days ago, I had Lakush attack 3 of their drug plantation villages. Therefore, you'll need to make your move soon, or the opposition will make their escape. What? I see. Marquis Raven, can you move right away? That would be very difficult. Your servant is aware of which nobles are not involved with Eight Fingers, but not all of them are reliable. There are probably only 2 households left. I will need time to persuade them, but there is another problem. What is it, Marquis? Our forces might not be enough to overcome Eight Fingers. Some powerful adventurers could take on an entire army by themselves. There were many theories as to why there were so many superhuman individuals among the ranks of adventurers. The most reliable explanation was that under extreme circumstances, the body, some might say the brain, would become abnormally active and trigger a super recovery phenomenon, causing one's physical parameters to increase non-stop. Other explanations included some form of blessing, evolution through the absorption of mana, and so on. However, what they all had in common was that the physical, mental and magical attributes of the body would increase rapidly. There were higher chances of this improvement phenomenon happening when facing powerful opposition. Given the fact that adventurers often face powerful monsters with varied abilities, it was very easy for them to trigger such phenomena. If the enemy had personnel like that, regular soldiers would be useless against them. Your personal guard ought to be able to handle it. Am I wrong, Marquis? Raven's answer to Zenak's question was a shake of the head. It is true that they are retired adventurers, and all of them are above mithril rank. However, the enemy also counts incredibly powerful people among their number. The 6 arms are the direct action department of Eight Fingers, and each of them is said to be the equivalent of an adamantite-ranked adventurer. If they took the field, things would be very bad for us. Of course, things might be different if we could gang up on them. Adamantite ranked. Zenak's speechlessness was only to be expected. It was said that each of these highest-ranked adventurers could take on 1,000 enemies and win. One could even say that no amount of normal people could begin to oppose them. Then I'll ask Lakush of Blue Rose split up and take action, with each of them taking a single location. It should work if any one place does not have 2 or more members of 8 fingers in it. Your servant recalls that Blue Rose has 5 members but the enemy has 6 people in 6 arms. That being the case, having them act separately might incur the cardinal sin of splitting one's forces up. Although, I doubt all 6 of them are in the royal capital. If the members of Blue Rose do not mind, then we can attack 5 locations at once. I'd like to take them all out at once, but that would be difficult. What a shame. Eliminating them all in one stroke would be the best outcome. The parchment Renner held listed 7 locations, including the ones Anak and Raven knew, that would make 8 targets. However, they did not have that much manpower. It angers me that we'll have to let 3 targets go, but there's nothing we can do about it. How about having those who have finished their attacks proceed to the remaining 3 locations? That ought to be the best solution. Your Highness, mobilizing troops in the royal capital will be problematic. How should we handle that? I'll talk to Father about it. Don't worry about it for now. You'll have to give it up in the end. No. I'm a little greedy. Just then, there was a knock on the door. He's here. The maids should have gone to answer the door, but today they were not around. Therefore, it was Raven who made a stand up, but Renner tugged on his hand to stop him before walking without hesitation to the door and opening it. After checking to see who was outside, Renner was all smiles as she looked back to the other 2. We have someone who might be able to help us with attacking the 6th location. The confused man that Renner ushered into the room was the kingdom's warrior captain, Gaze of Stronov.